Among hardcore Resident Evil fans, there's one entry that stands far above the rest, one that only the most experienced series vets even think about approaching, a game that somehow implemented the survival horror standard into a multiplayer setting. That's right, today we're finally covering the coveted Resident Evil Outbreak, one of Capcom's first shots at a then burgeoning online gaming market. So can a game meant to be experienced with a group of friends call itself a true RE title with a straight face? Well, I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews. Welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. RE Outbreak may have been released in 2003, but the idea behind its creation started much earlier than that. The original idea behind the game's concept started before RE2's release as a minigame that would have players trying to survive for as long as possible against a horde of BOWs. The idea was eventually cut due to the developers thinking what made RE games scary was a lack of multiplayer, an idea that modern Capcom would conveniently forget during the development of RE5. Fast forward to 2002, and Capcom was eager to restart this project as a part of their online gaming push. Along with Monster Hunter and Automodelista, Outbreak was supposed to test the waters and find out if this fangled new online craze would stick around. After a few name changes, the game seemed to be well on its way, but for some reason, more than half of the included scenarios were cut. The final product would feature 4 locations for players to try and survive, but not even a year later, what was essentially an expansion pack was released in the form of Outbreak File 2. This would include 5 of the cut scenarios and a few gameplay improvements. Since these 2 games are just content packs for the overall Outbreak experience, today we'll be covering both in the same video. And well, there's not too much to say about this game's development other than that. Despite more than a few missed deadlines, Outbreak didn't trip over any of the series' trademark development catastrophes. Most of what little controversy there actually is came from such an early adoption of Capcom's netcode and the eventual shutdown of Capcom's official gameplay servers, a subject we'll definitely be touching on a bit later. But before that, let's take a look at Outbreak's quote-unquote story. The Outbreak games don't exactly follow what you could traditionally call a story. Each scenario takes place during different stages of Raccoon City's initial T-virus outbreak and don't follow any kind of chronological order. Each of these missions are standalone experiences, so don't waste your time wondering how our survivors made it from escaping the epicenter of the outbreak in the city to the very bottom of Umbrella's underground lab, because they're all essentially really cool what-if scenarios. But this doesn't mean there's no story at all to deal with. Some missions tell small tales involving specific characters in the roster, and these can be pretty interesting, at least for people like me who up till now only played the game single player. It was nice going through these environments and having a small RE-like story to go through, but now that I played it online, I can say this does detract from the experience, at least just a little bit. If anyone in your party triggers one of these story cutscenes, no matter how far away you are from them, you're still stuck watching it. Scenarios with a lot of these moments can break up the flow a bit, but like I said, it actually contributes to the single player, so we'll call it a draw for now. Just like the RE games of the past, there's a bunch of story to be told in the form of collectible journal entries. Given you have enough time to stop and read them, these documents sometimes chronicle the last actions of someone caught up in the outbreak and make for some really solid world building. Of course, this should be of no surprise for fans of the first few entries in the series. Resident Evil has been perfecting this type of storytelling for years, and sadly that's about as deep as the lore gets. Since these were meant to be standalone experiences and focus more on surviving than telling you why you're there, most of the story comes from already being aware of your surroundings, since many were taken from the games in the series. For example, the remaining members of the RPD's Last Stand might be relatively compelling for new players, but fans of 2 will love a look at the events that preceded Leon and Claire stumbling into the main hall. There's a lot of areas like this which will require some previous series knowledge, but there doesn't seem to be much aside from that. I guess this makes sense given the fact that the game was designed as a multiplayer online experience, but fans like me who are awaiting the next-gen RE game on Sony's powerhouse of a console, the PS2, were left with a glimpse of what could have been. If you ask me, the assets and style of Outbreak could have made for an amazing entry in the mainline series, but hey, beggars can't be choosers. I know it sounds like I'm getting down on Outbreak for a lack of connecting story, but I'm really not. I understand that a big overarching narrative would have likely made the experience worse given the multiplayer nature of the game, but I still find myself wondering what could have been. So in summary, Outbreak's story is deeper than it might look on the surface. Fans of the originals will probably get more out of it than newcomers, but neither will be getting a fully fleshed out narrative, and to be fair, they shouldn't really be expecting to.
It's gonna blow! Get out!
Okay, so now we're getting down to the real nitty-gritty. Outbreak took some very bold steps in its day and attempted to bring some of the survival horror genre into the relatively unexplored world of console-based online multiplayer. And at the risk of leaving you with a cliffhanger, let's wait till the end to determine whether or not they accomplished this goal. Outbreak Files 1 and 2 are made up of several medium-sized scenarios, each one made to be its own self-contained story and gameplay experience. While some differ in their approach, they all use equal amounts of that old survival horror magic. During a typical game of Outbreak, you'll be solving all kinds of puzzles, fighting off BOWs, and of course, attempting to survive in some bleakly isolating environments. Essentially, the old gang is back together, and thanks to the changes made to keep the online play feeling snappy, have been cranked up to expert mode. Menus no longer pause the game, guns without extra magazines have to be reloaded one round at a time, and the new virus infection meter will see slow players turning into a zombie long before they're able to escape the hell of Raccoon City. Zombified players can attack their own teammates, which is a perfect time to mention that this game can be played with 3 other people. But we're going to have to switch over to some footage of another variety to cover that. See, Outbreak's official server shut down in the US towards the end of 2007 and about 3 years later in Japan. The good news, there is indeed servers kept alive by a dedicated community of fans. The bad news, thanks to the use of different connection protocols and the lack of packet captures, only the Japanese version of the game can still be played online. Now, I'm lucky enough to have a Japanese PS2 and a copy of Outbreak, but the sign-in process and options being in Japanese makes for a damn hard time, so we'll be checking out the game exactly how most of you are likely to see it with the PCSX2 emulator. The user interface may differ between the two games, but once you're signed in, the process of starting a room and getting some players together works a lot like it does in modern titles. Once you're in your chosen scenario, you'll notice these games take full advantage of your 4-person group. Throughout each area, there are a number of tasks that need to be performed, whether it's key items needing to be found, weapon and ammo collection, or just a bit of backup. Each member of your group can really make the experience much more forgiving.
Damn, this is so cool. You're like pushing the car. I'm over here downing zombies so you could do it. That's so fucking sweet.
Like I said before, some changes needed to be made to the survival horror playbook to make sure it still worked in a multiplayer environment. For example, your inventory only consists of 4 slots. This puts an even bigger emphasis on working together and gives you that old familiar heart attack when you have to make a choice between a life-saving green herb or some much-needed handgun ammo. Luckily, the game features an item trading mechanic which helps each character fall into a specific role. For example, there may be many shotguns hidden throughout a scenario, but not everyone's going to have room for one, so as each specific survivor comes across that kind of ammo, they can bring it to the one person holding that weapon. The same goes for key items and healing herbs. In this sense, Outbreak kind of feels like an MMO that doesn't force any one player into any one predetermined role, but supplies a great incentive for those that choose to follow that path. You can choose between one of 8 characters to play as, and like you would expect, each has perks and downsides. From a larger inventory, melee item creation, and healing herb upgrades, the survivor you pick may make or break a run. The online play you're seeing here is mostly me playing with the infamous Sober Dwarf and one of my Patreon supporters, 5 Minutes of Mystery. While we were playing, it became clear that teamwork played a massive role in actually completing a scenario, and thanks to me not picking up either of these games since about 2005, each run was both insanely stressful and massively fun to figure out.
There he is.
Oh, coming. I'm coming. Oh boy, oh geez. Okay. Distract him with your large body.
That's what I'm doing.
Being able to communicate with a partner and organize a successful maneuver was about the most satisfying thing I've gotten from a game in a long time. Imagine playing RE2 but with a friend playing Claire, and the both of you heading in separate directions to grab all the plugs necessary to get to the sewer. Or even better, imagine unloading into a massive group of the undead, while the rest of your party is working their hardest to blast open a door. Man, this game is awesome. Online play in Outbreak is an amazing combination of classically authentic RE mixed with equal amounts of multiplayer cooperation and atmospheric dread. I really can't gush enough about how much fun it was, even though we elected to play most of the scenarios on easy. And on a completely different note, did you know that difficulty scales according to a full 4-person team, regardless of how many people are actually present in the scenario? Just some food for thought before you make fun of me. But let's face it, you're going to do that anyways, which, if we're being honest, is why I love you guys. Outside of online multiplayer, the experience is pretty much the same, but without the fun of keeping zombies away from a friend who's trying to knock down a door. On the plus side, the devs added personalities to each AI-controlled character that dictates how well they're going to react to your commands, if they even react at all. Now, this isn't exactly groundbreaking, but they certainly did need to include this, so it's pretty cool. I would definitely recommend the online play over just running around with AI bots, but this is actually a good way to get familiar with the scenario without looking like a fool online, something I would definitely know nothing about.
I wonder what they were doing. Were they just fighting the boss, you think? Without us?
Yeah, they probably were.
Holy shit, we were such noobs.
Though we have no time to waste, we came up against another dead end.
They totally did. We were the most useless teammates.
Of course, it's not all great. During online play, it's not uncommon for zombies to teleport around when the connection bottoms out for a bit, and the added difficulty that comes with cranking all the knobs to 11 can make you lose your mind even in normal mode. Then there's the wacky long and frequent loading times that I assume came from how the maps had to be segmented due to either memory limitations, early 2000s internet connection speeds, or a combination of the two. But if you know this show, you know we don't deal in perfection here. Now, I've been going on and on about how fun the game is using modern voice chat to coordinate strategies, but that's not exactly the way the game was meant to be played. What I want to do is give you a rundown on how Outbreak operated in the context of a 2004 online console game. The only problem is, until this review, I have never played Resident Evil Outbreak online, so I can't tell you what it was like, but I definitely know someone who can. Take it away, Soberdorf.
Resident Evil Outbreak was a very interesting beast when it was first released. For the most part, everything that was mentioned was just as true back then as it is today, and even after a decade, it's one of the few multiplayer survival horror experiences available. However, when it was first released, reception for Outbreak was very mixed for a few reasons. One of those reasons was being how the game handled multiplayer. In terms of design, Capcom made some, we'll say, interesting decisions when it came to the online mode. The most noticeable was, despite it being a game that required cooperation, there's no way to effectively communicate with other players. The game features no chat support, either in voice or in text. Instead, it required you to use the game's ad-lib system. Players only had access to a few context-sensitive phrases that they could use, making communication like a less effective version of charades. And even then, they were only heard when fellow survivors were in close enough range. This wasn't a technical limitation either. Capcom has stated this was intentional in order to preserve the game's atmosphere. And to give credit, there was some validity to that. Being separated from your partners, calling for help, not knowing if they were able to hear you, makes Outbreak a true survival horror experience. Unfortunately, the game's design didn't quite facilitate the lack of communication. In a game about working together, not being able to convey even the most basic information was often an exercise in frustration. In scenarios that feature a more linear map, the lack of voice wasn't an issue. However, a mission like the Hive, where you must collect different items on different floors, there was no way to communicate to each other who was going where or who had already grabbed what. Players back then came up with some ingenious workarounds, such as using the ad-lib system to give each phrase a floor number, so that other players knew where to go in order to stick together. But there's a reason why you can still play this game today. Despite these issues not sitting well with critics, it was still an experience you couldn't get anywhere else, which is why the die-hard Resident Evil fans spent years trying to bring it back to life. Nowadays, with the advent of voice chat programs like Discord, you can experience Outbreak any way you like. And gaining experience builds character.
Alright, that's enough of that. We don't have any catchphrases here on Avalanche Reviews. Well, I may have shown my hand a bit in the beginning, but yeah, this is a damn awesome game to play with a few friends. Aside from that though, it's an amazing case study into how versatile the survival horror framework can be. I mean, here we are in an online multiplayer game, and yet still hitting peak survival horror. It's insane how well the devs were able to cram a true RE experience into such a wildly different package. If I've done my job and convinced you to give this a shot, I'll be including the guide that I use to get online in the description. So get out there and experience the absolute joy of being a huge burden to people who've been playing this game for years. Released in the same year and on the same console as Resident Evil Dead Aim, you'd figure Outbreak would be on the Unreal Engine as well, but it makes use of its own architecture, a move I assume had something to do with implementing netplay. But the move to a brand new engine didn't mean the radical change you might expect. The camera is still relatively fixed, but it uses the same cinematic sweeps and zooms found in Code Veronica, which I really liked back then. This type of camera means the series staple, pre-rendered CG backgrounds would have to be ditched for full 3D environments, and even though I would have loved to see this game with a more traditional look, I can't complain too much. These 3D backdrops look absolutely wonderful, and their attention to small details makes them feel authentic enough to be compared to the originals. The immersive feeling of being isolated in a place that looks like it was populated only a short time ago shines through in this new direction, and shows how amazing a modern RE game could be, even if it's stuck to what some people might call a dated design. Now that the menu no longer pauses the game, a new design had to be made, allowing for most of the screen to be visible, and this new look is another touch that may stray pretty far from the original framework, but still feels like it's keeping with the spirit of its forefathers. And speaking of bringing old stuff back, let me assure you, these new takes on old locations like Umbrella's Underground Research Lab and the RPD Precinct look so damn cool this time around. Thanks to the more narrow and closed-off nature of Outbreak's environments, some pathways in these revisits had to be blocked off, and there's definitely a lot of artistic interpretation going on, but this new spin on these old areas feels just right. The 3D nature of the environments means the possibility for some cool lighting effects, and even though Outbreak does implement some great-looking real-time lighting, it doesn't feel like too much of a step up from the pre-rendered days. You've been looking at footage of the PS2 version running on actual hardware so far in this segment, and even though the game looks killer upscaled to 1080p through the FrameMeister, there are a few downsides to consider. The XRGB Mini is world-renowned for its smooth handling of 240p, but it tends to not perform as well on 480i, at least for some people. I happen to like the sharp look of aliasing on PS2 era games, but I know it's not everyone's favorite way to view this type of stuff. I will say decreasing the sharpness down to the neutral level in the FrameMeister settings can act like a type of anti-aliasing, but there's one issue that can't be fixed as easily. One of this scaler's major flaws is the visual noise that can be seen in flat shaded colors like gray. On colorful games like Final Fantasy X, this is a non-issue, but the muted color palette found in Outbreak will definitely make this noise more visible than usual. Now, that's all well and good, but let's face it, 99% of you will not be seeing this game running on a $300 video scaler. If you're looking to play this game online, you'll be looking at something like this. And the good news is, this game runs flawlessly on the PCSX2 emulator. It's amazing seeing this game looking this good, and the cool thing is, this isn't even as close to as good as it gets. For my video settings, I wanted something close to what I could get from upscaling, so I used a measly 2x multiple for the internal render resolution and a PS2-like bilinear filter to help with stair-stepping. With these settings, I was able to maintain smooth gameplay, and being a fan of emulation around 2010, I was blown away at how stable this all ran. During my hours of play, I had no crashes or lockups, and only saw one area with a small visual error, which, if we're being fair, isn't exactly exclusive to emulation. Look at this oddity in Capcom's own in-engine pre-recorded cutscene on the PS2. And since we're complimenting Outbreak, let's talk about how amazing the sound design is. Not only are there some killer renditions of classic songs to be found, but also sound effects are a step above the rest too. If you're playing online and one of your team members is close to your location, you will actually hear them running around or shooting a gun in the next room. Little stuff like this goes a hell of a long way in making sure the multiplayer aspect of the game doesn't detract from the Resident Evil side of things. And if you ask me, that's exactly what this experience is. For all intents and purposes, RE should not be able to exist in this kind of environment, but here we are. Resident Evil Outbreak is not only a celebration of everything that made the series great, but also a very interesting experiment with the new phenomenon of online console gaming. I absolutely recommend you grab a friend and a Japanese ISO of the game and experience what could have been an incredible new direction for the series. While you're doing that, I'm going to get back to work because with the Outbreak games out of the way, there's only one multi-entry spin-off franchise left to cover. But until then, I hope to see all of you again right here on the Resident Evil Retrospective. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I also want to thank Sober Dwarf for jumping in here and lending me his voice and experience, and a big thanks to 5 Minutes of Mystery, my Patreon supporter who played with me and showed me the ropes a little bit. If you feel like getting even more retro game knowledge from a guy with a long beard, I'll be linking Sober Dwarf's channel here on screen and in the description. And if you like what you saw here, maybe click that subscribe button and check out my Patreon if you feel like supporting this show.